Romans were convinced to be superior to other civilizations, absolutely, but this conviction was not based on race and ethnicity. Slavery as well in the Roman world was not based on race. Race and slavery were not connected by any means. Race and slavery in ancient Rome. What were they like? Today, we're gonna find out.
You do have a name. My name is Gladiator.
Buongiorno a tutti ragazzi, Luca here, professor of history and enthusiast of Italian culture. Gladiator II is out worldwide and there are already hundreds of reviews, but today I want to do something different in front of the Colosseum. I want to focus on these two aspects, race and slavery, that are covered a lot in the movie. But of course, Gladiator is an American blockbuster production, and certain scenes might trick you into thinking that race and slavery in the ancient Rome were the same as what happened, for example, in America in the 1800s. But they were not. They were completely different. Let's talk about it. But before that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button. In the movie Gladiator II, you will see many different civilizations and ethnic groups coming from different parts of the ancient world. Maybe there are a little bit too many people with blue eyes and light skin, but that's because it's an American production and so they need actors, native speakers of English. But in general, you will see Celtic people, Germanic people, people from the Middle East, North Africa, the Mediterranean area, and that's very, very realistic of what the Roman society was all about. You could find people from all across the ancient world. Romans were convinced to be superior to other civilizations, absolutely, but this conviction was not based on race and ethnicity. Differently from what happened in America, in the American expansion toward West, which was marked by an idea of racial superiority, Romans simply did not know what this was like, what this meant. Their idea of superiority was based on other elements. If racism existed in the Roman world, was more of a cultural nature. The idea, born in Greece and developed in Rome, was that other civilizations were culturally inferior, so they had to be conquered and civilized by the Romans. You can clearly see this in the beautiful piece of art behind me, the Trajan column, which tells the story of the Emperor Trajan and the Roman army conquering the province of Dacia, today's Romania, and there are many scenes in the column in which you see the tribes chiefs of the Dacia people enslaved and subjugated by the Romans. It was a very brutal and cruel process, but once it was finished, Dacia would become a province of the Roman Empire, and gradually people of Dacia would be granted the Roman citizenship. And provinces were very, very important in the Roman Empire. Many of the emperors in the last part of the empire came from very distant provinces, and having, for example, the black skin did not imply any penalty, did not carry any penalty. The character of Macrinus, very, very important in Gladiator II, played by Denzel Washington, is a real historical character. He came from more or less today's Morocco. He was black, but he became emperor for 1 year. And there were other black emperors in the history of the Roman Empire. So again, race did not imply any prejudice or penalty.
The Roman world was extremely multicultural and cosmopolitan. Race was not a particularly important issue. The Emperor Hadrian was born near Seville in the Hispania Baetica, and nevertheless he became emperor. Septimius Severus was born in Leptis Magna, Libya, and he managed to become emperor as well.
Romans did notice physical differences, but without the idea of racial superiority that is common to modern societies. There were more of a curiosity. For example, when they met the Ethiopians that from their perspective were a very exotic people, there was curiosity, not a racial bias because, for example, their skin was black. This concept was non-existing in the Roman society. Romans did have a lot of prejudice toward other cultures and civilizations, but it was more of a cultural prejudice, as I said before, not a racial one. For example, about the Greeks, they thought that Greeks were great people, very cultured, smart, intelligent, but weak. On the contrary, about Germanic tribes, they thought these people were great warriors, courageous, but they were too rough. So, race was not the most important thing in the Roman society, and the value of a man or a civilization, as I said, was based on more cultural visions. For example, being a citizen, being a slave, the legal status, and also being a slave. So slavery, as you can clearly see in the movie Gladiator, was a very, very important part of the Roman society. But be aware of the fact that slavery, now we're going to talk about this, was a completely different institution compared to the one you're thinking when you think about slavery. So the American black people enslaved, completely different. Slavery as well in the Roman world was not based on race. You did not become a slave because you were black or brown or whatever. That was not what happened. People were normally enslaved because their civilization was somewhat conquered by the Romans. Again, this is something that you can clearly see in the column behind me. And you can also notice this in the movie Gladiator, where the protagonist himself, Anno, he's a member of a city that is conquered by the Romans, and most of the people are enslaved. So race and slavery were not connected by any means.
Sanctae urbis Romae Augustus, novum legatum ad Germaniam misit, senatorem publium quintilium varum.
Verstehst du, was er sagt?
Futuete, velueste porro nil tenem.
And the key verb here is to become, because it indicates a movement, a transition from a situation to another. In the Roman world, people were not born slave, they became slave most of the times. This is very different from what happened in America, where the fact of being slave was because of your race, of your ethnicity. And in Rome, slaves many times could be emancipated and freed. There were many different paths to emancipation and freedom, and once you were a free citizen of Rome, there were many possibilities ahead of you. You could become an incredibly influential person in the Roman society. Some of them became incredibly rich and influential. One of them in particular was very close to become emperor, so there was no prejudice toward former slavery. This was very different from, again, the American world. I'm not saying that Romans were very kind with slaves. For example, when there was the Spartacus rebellion, Romans absolutely massacred all the rebels, crucified most of them. They were very harsh if their idea of slavery was not respected and the law was infringed. But in general, the underlying idea of slavery and being freed was very different. And there were many different paths to slavery and then emancipation. You could be a teacher for a Roman nobleman, a maiden for a Roman noblewoman. You could be an advisor, a counselor for an important politician. There were many different ways, but in case of Hanno, the protagonist of the movie, a strong and mighty man, fighting as a gladiator in the arena was by far the most likely scenario. Most of the time, as you can clearly see in the movie, you died. But if you survived many paths could open before you. Not only emancipation, but also becoming a very important man in the Roman society. There was no prejudice against it. And I have to say that in the movie, Ridley Scott's vision, in my opinion, is a little bit too judgmental, with the eyes of a 21st century man judging the institution of slavery and race in the ancient Rome, in my opinion, with a little bit of a superiority vision that I did not appreciate, because I always say that you don't have to judge the past with the eyes of today. Let me know in the comments what you think about this.
A male slave who had been legally manumitted by a Roman citizen enjoyed not only passive freedom from ownership, but active political freedom, libertas, including the right to vote.
So, race in the ancient Rome, despite being a harsh and cruel institution, was still part of the broader vision that Romans had of the world. It was very open, dynamic, with some kind of inclusive vision, because the fact that you were born a slave or that you were enslaved during your life did not imply necessarily that you would die as a slave. This was the exact opposite as what happened in America in 1800s, where because of the color of your skin and because of your race, in a very cruel ethnical way, you were doomed. Your life was, you were born slave, you would die slave, with very few exceptions. It was completely different. This is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think, what your thoughts are about race and slavery in the ancient Rome compared to the modern institution of slavery. Let me know. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one. Ciao ragazzi.